The first thing anyone noticed was the silence. A cavernous ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton, draped in velvet and dripping with crystal chandeliers. A room that moments before had been thrumming with the self-important chatter of Houston's elite, had fallen utterly, completely silent. The only sound was the distant, polite cough of a waiter and the soft, rhythmic click of a single woman's heels on the marble floor. The silence was a vacuum, pulling every eye toward the grand entrance. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom, so polished it seemed to drink the light, had purred to a stop outside. Two men in sharp, dark suits, men whose stillness was more intimidating than any weapon, had emerged first. One opened the rear door, and then she stepped out. The woman was a vision sculpted from gold and midnight. She wore a custom-fit gown of shimmering kente cloth, the threads of gold so dense they seemed to liquidize with her every movement. It was a dress that spoke not of price tags, but of heritage, of looms in a village thousands of miles away, of hands that had woven stories into the fabric. Diamonds, simple and severe, glittered at her ears and throat, but they were secondary to the regal column of her neck, the quiet power in her posture. Her hair was styled in an intricate crown of braids, a testament to her roots. She wasn't just wearing a dress, she was wearing her history. Across the room, Veronica Sterling, the gala's chairwoman and self-appointed queen of the city's social scene, felt a tremor of confusion. She didn't recognize the woman, but she recognized the power. It was an aura that couldn't be bought, only earned. Veronica, herself poured into a crimson gown that had cost more than a mid-sized sedan, felt a prickle of professional jealousy. Who was this usurper? Who had dared to outshine her at her own event? Her smile, a carefully constructed thing that was 40% real and 60% cosmetic dentistry, faltered. Then the woman turned her head fully into the light, and Veronica's world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face, leaving a sickly, pale mask beneath her expensive foundation. Her perfectly manicured hand, the one holding a flute of Dom Perignon, began to tremble. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But the face was unmistakable. Older, yes, infused with a confidence that was entirely new. But it was her, Amara, the woman her husband had discarded, the woman she had personally, viciously, and repeatedly humiliated, the woman she had last seen in a stained t-shirt and worn-out jeans, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. Beside Amara, a man stepped into the light. David Kalu, the reclusive, almost mythical billionaire whose presence at any event guaranteed its success. He was a ghost in the financial world, his name on buildings and foundations, but his face rarely seen. Tonight, he was not a ghost. He was a man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, and his eyes, as he looked at the woman beside him, held a look of such profound adoration that it was a physical force in the room. He gently took Amara's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Veronica's mind was a screech of static. Amara? With David Kalu? The name, the face, the wealth, the woman. The pieces refused to fit. It was a violation of the natural order of things, of the hierarchy she held so dear. Some people were born to struggle. She had said those words to Amara's face. She had believed them. The host for the evening, a local news anchor with a voice as smooth as butter, stepped to the podium. His own professional composure rattled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice slightly breathless, "we have a surprise announcement, a final, truly staggering donation to cap off our evening and fully fund the new citywide community kitchen project." A murmur went through the crowd. The goal had already been met. What was this? "A donation," The host continued, his eyes wide as he read the card. Of $10 million. A collective gasp swept the ballroom. Phones, which had been politely tucked away, suddenly emerged, their screens lighting up faces with a ghoulish glow. $10 million. It was an absurd, fantastical number. The host cleared his throat, letting the shock settle before delivering the final blow. This incredible act of generosity comes from the newly established Kalu Adeyemi Foundation. Founded by Mr. David Kalu and his fiancée, the celebrated culinary artist, Chef Amara Adeyemi. The name, her name, Amara Adeyemi, linked with his fiancé, chef, foundation. The words were like hammer blows against Veronica's skull. She saw David Kalu lean over and whisper something in Amara's ear. Amara smiled, a real, radiant smile that reached her eyes and seemed to light the entire room. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy and peace. It was the smile of a woman who had won, not by fighting, not by clawing, but simply by being. For Veronica, that smile was the end. The carefully constructed facade of her life, the wealthy husband, the social status, the perceived power, crumbled into dust. The champagne flute slipped from her nerveless fingers. It did not shatter. It hit the marble floor with a dull, pathetic clink, rolling under a table, forgotten. Her vision swam. The chandeliers blurred into streaks of cruel, mocking light. The floor rushed up to meet her, and the last thing Veronica Sterling saw before the world went black was the face of the woman she had tried to crush, looking not at her, not at anyone, but looking forward, toward a future Veronica could not even begin to imagine. If you love stories where the hand that gives is the hand that gathers, and where true character is rewarded beyond measure, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the story of how this woman went from a single container of soup to a $10 million foundation is going to restore your faith in humanity. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 5 years earlier, Amara Adeyemi was not a queen. She was a ghost, a 28-year-old woman haunting the edges of her own life. She moved through the world with a quietness born of exhaustion, a single mother to a bright, beautiful 6-year-old boy named Leo. Her life was a relentless cycle of work, worry, and the bone-deep ache of loneliness. She worked 2 jobs. From dusk till the dead of night, she was part of an invisible army that cleaned the gleaming office towers of downtown Houston, wiping away the fingerprints and coffee stains of people whose lives she could barely imagine. Her hands, which knew the art of coaxing flavor from spices and herbs, were raw from chemical cleansers. Then, after a few hours of sleep that felt more like a brief blackout, she would work the lunch rush as a kitchen hand in a small, greasy diner, chopping onions and washing mountains of dishes, the smell of stale fryer oil clinging to her clothes and hair. It was a life measured in hours worked and dollars earned. $10.50 an hour at the cleaning company, $9.25 an hour at the diner. Not enough. It was never enough. There was the rent for their tiny, 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was more concrete than trees. There was the light bill, the gas bill, the bus pass. There was Leo's shoes, which he grew out of with alarming speed. There was the constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that lived in her chest, the fear of a single unexpected expense, a broken-down car, a sick child, a rent increase that could send their fragile world spiraling. This was not the life she had imagined. She had come to America with her husband, Michael, full of the fierce, bright hope of a new beginning. But Michael had been seduced by the glittering, hollow promises of a world she didn't understand. He grew ashamed of her accent, of the food she cooked, of the simple, sturdy values she had brought with her from her village near Lagos. He met Veronica. Veronica, who was all sharp angles and shiny surfaces. Veronica, who saw life as a ladder and was determined to climb it, no matter who she had to step on. Michael left Amara for that life, for that woman, and in the divorce, he had been as cruel as he had been dismissive. He fought her for everything, leaving her with nothing. No money, no plan, no place to go. The deepest wound, the one that still festered, was the humiliation. It had happened on a rainy Tuesday, about a year after the divorce. Amara had driven her sputtering 1998 Honda Civic, a car held together by hope and duct tape, to Michael and Veronica's sterile, oversized house in a gated community to pick up Leo. She was late, delayed by a bus that ran behind schedule, and she was already flustered. She rang the bell, and Veronica herself answered the door. She looked Amara up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal that was designed to wound. Veronica's lip curled in a sneer of performative pity. "Leo, your mother is here," she called into the house, her voice dripping with condescension. As Leo ran out, Veronica blocked Amara's path. "You know," Veronica said, her voice low and conspiratorial, as if sharing a beauty tip, "you could at least try to make an effort. You're embarrassing the boy, showing up looking like that." She gestured vaguely at Amara's clean but faded jeans and the simple cotton top she wore. Amara stood frozen, shame coiling in her gut. She just wanted to take her son and leave. But Veronica wasn't finished. She reached into her designer handbag, a thing that cost more than Amara's monthly rent, and pulled out a small wad of cash. 2 crumpled $20 bills. She held them out to Amara, pinched between her thumb and forefinger as if they were contaminated. "Here," Veronica said, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "For gas, and maybe a decent meal. You look like you could use one." She laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Honestly, it's a charity case. Some people are just born to struggle, I suppose." The words hung in the air, more violent than a slap. Amara felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, hot and sharp, but she would not cry. Not in front of this woman, not in front of her son. She looked at the money, then at Veronica's smug face. With a dignity that cost her everything she had, she simply shook her head, took Leo's hand, and walked away. The image of those 2 crumpled bills, offered as an insult, was burned into her memory. Some people are just born to struggle. In the quiet of her small apartment, her only refuge was the kitchen. There, amidst the steam and scent of ginger, garlic, and chili, she was not a cleaner or a dishwasher. She was an artist. She would cook the food of her home, the dishes her mother had taught her. Jollof rice that glowed like a sunset. Fried plantain, sweet and caramelized. And her specialty, her masterpiece, pepper soup. It was more than a recipe. It was a connection to her soul. It was the taste of home, of love, of a life where she had not been invisible. She would talk to her mother on the phone, the connection crackling across the miles. Her mother, a woman of few words and immense wisdom, would listen to the unspoken weariness in her daughter's voice. "Amara, my child," her mother had said one night, her voice a warm blanket over the phone line. "Remember what I told you. The heart of a man is not known by the clothes he wears, but by the hunger he is willing to share." Amara didn't fully understand it then, but she held on to the words. On another call, when Amara confessed her bitterness, her mother gave her another proverb, one that would become the compass of her life. "Do not worry about those who look down on you. Just keep your own heart open. The hand that gives always, always gathers." Amara held on to those words like a talisman. They were all she had. She worked, she cared for Leo, and she cooked. She poured all her pain, all her hope, all her love into her food, never knowing that a simple bowl of soup would soon become the key that would unlock the entire world. The day it all changed felt like any other day, which is to say, it was hard. It began with the groaning death of her Honda Civic's alternator, an expense she absolutely could not afford. The tow truck driver had looked at her with pity, which was almost worse than contempt. The repair would be $400. $400. It might as well have been $1 million. The rent was due in 3 days. Leo needed a new coat. The anxiety that hummed in her chest was now a roaring fire. She had managed to scrape together just enough money for Leo's dinner, chicken nuggets and apple slices, his favorite, and the bus fare. For herself, she had $3.47 left. It was enough for a small container of pepper soup from the little African market she loved, a place that smelled like home. It was her one meal for the day, her one small comfort. After picking up Leo from his after-school program, she dropped him off with a neighbor who would watch him while she went to her cleaning job. She had an hour to spare. Her body ached with a weariness that felt ancient. She walked to a small, forgotten park, a patch of green with a few worn-out benches near the bus stop. The autumn air had a sharp bite to it, and she pulled her thin jacket tighter. She sat on the cold metal of the bench, the warm container of soup in her hands, a small, precious anchor. The steam that curled up when she opened the lid carried the scent of her mother's kitchen, of a life she had lost. It smelled of hope. She was about to take the first spoonful, a moment of pure, selfish pleasure she had been looking forward to all day, when she saw him. On the next bench, hunched against the wind, was a man. He was dressed in clothes that were more holes than fabric, a thin, grimy coat, jeans frayed at the knees, and shoes that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles of bad road. His beard was unkempt, his face etched with a profound and startling despair. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was just sitting there, shivering, staring at nothing. But it was his eyes that caught her. They weren't vacant. They were intelligent, deep, and filled with a pain that she recognized. It was the pain of being invisible. In another life, David Kalu commanded boardrooms. His net worth, a figure he rarely thought about, was a staggering $3.7 billion, built from nothing through a combination of genius tech insights and relentless drive. He owned properties on 3 continents, a fleet of cars he never drove, and a watch collection that could fund a small country. But on that park bench, he was just David, a man with nothing. This was his penance, his experiment. 6 months prior, he had discovered his fiancée, a woman he had adored, was systematically planning to divorce him and take half his fortune. The betrayal wasn't about the money. It was about the lie. She had loved his lifestyle, not his soul. The discovery had shattered him, leaving him cynical and adrift. He remembered the words of his father, a man who had built a small empire himself, but never lost his connection to his roots in a small Nigerian village. "David, my son," his father had told him, his voice rough with wisdom. "Money is a loud noise that deafens people to the truth. To find a real woman, a woman of substance, you must look for her when you have nothing. Go and be nothing. See who offers you a piece of their bread when you are a beggar. That is the woman you marry." And so, He had begun this strange pilgrimage. For 3 weeks, he had lived on the streets of the city he owned a piece of. His loyal assistant, Jide, would drop him off in the morning and pick him up late at night, horrified and exasperated by the whole affair. And in those 3 weeks, David had seen the worst of humanity. He had been ignored, cursed, spat at. He had seen people throw away half-eaten meals in front of him without a second glance. The experiment was failing. It was proving his cynicism right. He was cold, he was hungry, and he was about to give up. He was about to call Jide and tell him to come get him, to take him back to his sterile penthouse and his empty life. He had decided this was his last day. People were selfish. Connection was a myth. He was alone. And then he heard a voice, gentle, hesitant. "Sir?" He looked up. A woman was standing before him. She was plainly dressed, her face etched with a tiredness he was becoming familiar with. But her eyes held a light that was utterly foreign in this gray landscape. It was kindness. In her hands, she held a small, steaming container of what smelled like heaven. "It is not much," Amara said, her voice soft. She held the container out to him. "But it is hot, and no one should be hungry. Please," she insisted, "share this with me." David stared at her, then at the soup. He was the man who could buy the entire restaurant, the entire city block. He was being offered half of a woman's meager dinner. He saw the single plastic spoon. He saw her worn-out shoes. He saw the raw, chapped skin of her hands. And he felt a crack in the ice around his heart. For the first time in months, he felt something other than bitterness. He felt seen. Not as a billionaire, not as a target, but as a hungry man on a cold bench. He was so overwhelmed he couldn't speak. He simply nodded, his throat tight. Amara sat down beside him, not too close to be intrusive, but not too far to feel distant. She handed him the container and the spoon. "You eat first," she said simply. "You look colder than I am." The first spoonful of soup was a revelation. It was rich, spicy, complex, and deeply comforting. It tasted of ginger and Scotch bonnet peppers, of herbs he couldn't name, of time and care. It tasted like home. But more than the taste, it was the act itself. The pure, uncalculated generosity of it. He ate a few spoonfuls, the warmth spreading through his chest, and then handed the container back to her. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice raspy. "What is your name?" "Amara," she said, taking a small spoonful for herself. "And yours?" "David," he replied. The name felt real for the first time in weeks. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, passing the container back and forth, sharing the single spoon, until the soup was gone. It was the most profound meal David Kalu had ever eaten. He had dined at Michelin-starred restaurants all over the world, eaten food prepared by the most famous chefs, but nothing had ever tasted as good as that simple pepper soup on a cold park bench, shared with a stranger. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice full of genuine curiosity. "Why did you share with me? You barely have enough for yourself." Amara looked out at the street, at the buses and cars rushing by, full of people going somewhere. "My mother taught me that no one should go hungry if you have something to share," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It is not about how much you have. It is about the heart you have. Today, I had this soup. So, we had this soup." She smiled a small, weary smile. "It is simple." It was simple, and yet it was everything. David felt a stinging in his eyes and looked away, pretending to watch a bird. The hand that gives, gathers. His father's words echoed in his mind. He had found her. He had found the woman his father had told him to look for. But he wasn't ready. Not yet. He needed to know her. He needed to earn her trust, not as a billionaire, but as David, the man on the park bench. That first meeting became a ritual. David, in his disguise, started appearing on that same bench every afternoon, around the time Amara had her break before her evening shift. At first, she seemed surprised to see him again, but soon it became their routine, their place. He never asked for anything, but she always brought something. Some days it was a thermos of hot, sweet coffee. Other days, a sandwich she had made, with the crusts cut off, just like she did for Leo. And on the days she could afford it, she would bring 2 containers of her pepper soup, one for each of them. They talked. He was a careful, patient listener, and he slowly, gently drew her story out of her. He learned about Leo, about her dream of one day opening a small restaurant, a place where she could cook her food her way. He saw the passion light up her tired eyes when she spoke of it. She called it Amara's pot. He learned about her ex-husband, about the cruelty of his new wife, Veronica. He heard the pain in her voice, but he never heard self-pity. He only heard resilience. He saw the dignity she carried like a shield, the fierce, protective love she had for her son, the unwavering kindness she showed to a man she believed had nothing. She, in turn, learned about a version of David. He told her he had lost his family, that he had made mistakes and lost his way. He spoke of loneliness, of feeling disconnected from the world. He was intelligent, well-read, and surprisingly funny, with a dry wit that made her laugh. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the hour they spent together on that bench. For that 1 hour, she wasn't a cleaner or a kitchen hand. She was just Amara, talking to her friend David. She was seen. She was heard. She felt a connection that was deeper than anything she had felt with her own husband. She was falling for the man, not his circumstances. She saw a kind soul, a brilliant mind, trapped in a difficult life. She wanted to help him, to see him get back on his feet. Meanwhile, in another world, Jide, David's long-suffering driver and head of security, was losing his mind. Every evening, he would park the $500,000 Maybach several blocks away from the park, waiting for his billionaire boss to finish his poverty simulation. David would slide into the supple leather seats, smelling faintly of city grime and bus exhaust, a serene smile on his face. "So, how was our day amongst the common folks, sir?" Jide would ask, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did we solve world hunger today? Or did we just receive another pity sandwich?" David would just shake his head, his eyes distant. "Jide, you don't understand. Today she told me about her son. She wants to buy him a new winter coat, but she's worried about making rent. She has maybe $20 to her name, and she spent 3 of them on a coffee for me." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "She has no idea who I am. She thinks I am the lowest of the low, and she treats me with more respect than anyone I've known for years." Jide sighed, adjusting the rearview mirror. "Sir, with all due respect, this is insane. You are David Kalu. You could buy her 100 coat factories. Just tell her." "No," David said firmly. "Not yet. If I tell her now, I'll never know. I'll never know if she loves me or the man who can buy coat factories." He looked out the tinted window at the city lights. "This is the most real thing in my life, Jide. I'm not giving that up." Jide just shook his head and put the car in drive. "As you wish, sir. Shall I have the chef prepare your usual dinner? Or are you full of authenticity and peanut butter and jelly?" The test, for David, was over. He had seen enough. He had spent 2 months sitting on that bench, receiving kindness he hadn't earned, from a woman who had every reason to be bitter and closed off. He was in love, not with her face or her body, but with the very fabric of her character. He was in love with her strength, her dignity, her compassion. Now, it was time to end the charade. But he had to do it carefully. He couldn't just show up in a suit and a fancy car. That would feel like another betrayal, a lie of a different kind. He had to bridge the two worlds. One afternoon, sitting on their bench, he told her, with a nervous energy she mistook for excitement, "Amara, I have some good news. A friend of mine set me up with a job interview, a real one. It's for a management position at a logistics company." It was a partial truth. He did own a logistics company. "If I get it," he continued, his heart pounding, "if this works out, I want to take you to dinner, a proper dinner, to thank you for everything." Amara's face broke into a genuine, joyous smile. She was so proud of him. "Oh, David, that is wonderful news. Of course, you will get it. I knew you could. You are too smart to be on this bench forever." The thought of him leaving the bench gave her a strange pang of sadness, but she pushed it away. This was what she wanted for him. "Yes," she said, "I would love that." He told her the interview was on Friday. He would arrange for a car to pick her up at 7. She protested, saying she could take the bus, but he insisted. "Please, Amara, let me do this one thing. Just this one." On Friday evening, Amara dressed with care. She chose her best outfit, a simple but elegant black dress she had bought from a thrift store for $5 and tailored herself. She did her hair, put on a little makeup. She was nervous, excited. She imagined them going to a small, quiet restaurant, maybe Italian. She pictured David in a clean, second-hand suit, looking proud and hopeful. At 7 o'clock sharp, she stood outside her apartment building waiting. She expected to see an Uber, maybe an older model Toyota Camry. What pulled up to the curb was a car so long, so black, so impossibly sleek, it looked like a piece of the night sky had fallen to earth. A Mercedes Maybach S680. A hush fell over the street. People stopped and stared. Amara was certain it was a mistake. This car was for a celebrity, a politician, someone who lived in a different universe. Then the driver's door opened, and a man in a crisp, black chauffeur's uniform stepped out. It was Jide, but not the Jide David would later tell her about. This was Jide in his full professional glory. He walked to the rear door and opened it with a flourish. He looked directly at Amara. "Madame Adeyemi?" he said, his voice polite and professional. Amara was bewildered. "Yes, but I think there's been a mistake. I'm waiting for a friend, for David." Jide gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "There is no mistake, madam. Mr. Kalu is waiting for you. Please." Mr. Kalu. The name meant nothing to her. Confused, but intrigued, she slid into the back of the car. The interior was cavernous, smelling of rich leather and quiet money. The door closed with a soft, satisfying thud, sealing her off from the world of bus stops and cracked pavement. The car pulled away from the curb as smoothly as a ship setting sail. They drove in silence, leaving her familiar neighborhood behind and heading towards the glittering towers of downtown. They pulled into a private underground garage, and an elevator took them straight up, no stops. The elevator doors opened directly into an apartment, or rather, a palace in the sky. It was a massive penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking 180-degree view of the entire city. The space was furnished with a minimalist elegance where every single object, a chair, a lamp, a sculpture, was clearly a piece of art. And standing in the middle of it all, silhouetted against the city lights, was David. But it wasn't the David she knew. The ragged clothes were gone, replaced by a dark, exquisitely tailored Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than her car had when it was new. His beard was trimmed, his hair was styled, and he stood with an easy confidence she had never seen before. He looked like he owned the world. Amara stopped just inside the door, her mind struggling to process the scene. The car, the driver, the penthouse, the man in the suit. It didn't make any sense. She looked at him, her eyes wide with confusion and a growing sense of dread. "David?" she whispered. "What is this? What's going on? Did you rob a bank?" The absurd question, born of sheer shock, hung in the air, and a flicker of the man she knew, the man from the park bench, appeared in his eyes. He chuckled, a nervous sound. "No, Amara," he said, walking slowly towards her. "I didn't rob a bank. I own the bank." He gently led her to a soft leather couch, and she sank into it, feeling dizzy. He sat across from her, leaning forward, his hands clasped, his eyes pleading for her to understand. And then he told her everything. His real name, David Kalu, his business, his wealth, the buildings, the companies. He told her about his ex-fiancée, the bitter betrayal, the emptiness that had followed. He told her about his father's advice, about the crazy experiment to find someone real. "I had to know, Amara," he said, his voice raw with an emotion that was achingly familiar. "My whole life, I've been surrounded by people who wanted something from me. My money, my name, my connections. I was so tired of the noise. I just wanted to find one person who would see me. Just me. The man with nothing." She listened, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a surge of anger. He had lied to her, but it was quickly extinguished by the profound vulnerability in his eyes. This wasn't a game to him. This was a desperate search for truth. He looked at her, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. "That first day in the park," he said, his voice cracking. "I was done. I was about to give up on the whole human race. I had decided that my father was a sentimental old fool and that people were fundamentally selfish. I was going to go back to my empty life in this empty apartment and just be rich and alone. And then you appeared." He took a shaky breath. "You had one meal, one small container of soup, and you shared it with a total stranger, a man who you thought was a beggar. You didn't do it for a reward. You didn't do it for an audience. You did it because that is who you are." He reached across and took her hands, the hands that were chapped from cleaning chemicals but had made him the most incredible food. "I wasn't looking for a woman who could handle my wealth, Amara. I was looking for a woman I could trust with my poverty. I was looking for a woman I could trust with my last meal. And that was you." The dam inside Amara finally broke. Tears began to stream down her face, but they weren't tears of anger or shock at the money. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking validation. All her life, she had felt like her best qualities, her kindness, her generosity, her quiet strength, were liabilities in a world that valued sharp elbows and loud voices. She had been told she was too soft, too simple. She had been discarded for it. And now, this man, this incredible, impossible man, was telling her that those very qualities were the most valuable things in the world. He was telling her that her character was a treasure. "You saw me," she whispered through her sobs. "You really saw me." David's own tears began to fall freely. He moved to the couch beside her and pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. "I saw everything," he said, his voice thick against her hair. "I saw the queen hiding inside the cleaning lady. and I fell in love with her. In that glittering penthouse, surrounded by billions of dollars of assets, the two of them just held each other and cried. They cried for the pain of the past, for the loneliness they had both felt, and for the staggering, miraculous relief of being truly, finally found. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of beautiful, dizzying change. David didn't just give Amara money, he gave her opportunity. He became the investor in her dream. With his capital and her vision, Amara's pot was born. It wasn't the small takeout joint she had imagined. It was a stunning, high-end restaurant in a prime Houston location, celebrating the rich complexity of West African cuisine. It was an instant, roaring success. Critics raved about the authenticity of her flavors, the artistry of her presentation. She opened a catering arm, which was soon booked a year in advance. She was no longer Amara, the kitchen hand. She was Chef Amara Adeyemi, a rising star in the culinary world. She moved out of her tiny apartment and into a beautiful home with a large backyard for Leo to play in. She hired her own staff, paying them a living wage and treating them with the respect she had so rarely been shown. She was the same Amara, kind, humble, hard-working, but now her canvas was bigger. David watched her blossom, his heart swelling with a pride that was almost painful. He had not created her success. He had simply removed the barriers that had been holding her back. Her talent, her spirit, that was all her own. Then the invitation arrived, an embossed, cream-colored cardstock that felt heavy with importance. It was an invitation to the annual Heart of the City Charity Gala, the most exclusive event on the Houston social calendar. The purpose of the gala was to raise funds for various city charities, and the chairwoman for this year's event, the signature at the bottom of the invitation, was a name that made Amara's blood run cold: Veronica Sterling. Her first instinct was to throw it away. The thought of being in the same room as that woman, of seeing the smug satisfaction on her face, was nauseating. She wanted no part of that world. "We don't have to go," she told David, her voice small. David took the invitation from her hands and looked at it, his expression unreadable. "I think we do," he said softly. He took her face in his hands. "My love, this is not about her. This is not about revenge. This is about you. For years, she made you feel small. She made you feel invisible. It is time for you to walk into that room, not as the woman she tried to break, but as the woman you are. It's time for the world to see you as I see you." He paused, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "And besides," he added, a glint in his eye, "I believe the gala is raising money for homeless outreach programs. I think we have a vested interest in that." She knew he was right. Hiding would be letting Veronica win. It was time to close that chapter of her life, not with anger, but with grace. "Okay," she whispered, "we'll go." The preparations were like something out of a fairy tale. David didn't just buy her a dress, he commissioned one. He flew in a renowned Ghanaian designer who sat with Amara, listened to her story, and sketched a gown that was a tribute to her journey. A regal, floor-length creation of gold and royal blue kente cloth, woven by hand in the Ashanti region. He had a private jeweler from Cartier design a simple necklace and earrings, brilliant cut diamonds that were meant to complement her glow, not create it. On the night of the gala, as she stood before the mirror, transformed, David came up behind her. He looked at her reflection, his eyes filled with awe. "Tonight," he said, his voice low and reverent, "you are not just Amara Adeyemi. You are an African queen, taking her rightful place." And so came the moment of the arrival. The silent ballroom, the clicking heels, the collective intake of breath. This time, we see it through Amara's eyes. She felt a tremor of fear as she stepped out of the car, the cool night air on her skin. But then David took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring, and the fear vanished, replaced by a quiet, unshakable calm. She was not here to impress anyone. She was here to be herself. They walked into the room, and she felt the hundreds of pairs of eyes on her. She ignored them, keeping her gaze fixed forward. Then she saw her, Veronica, rushing towards them, her face a mask of fawning adoration aimed at David. "Mr. Kalu, what an absolute honor to have you here," Veronica gushed, her voice a pitch higher than normal. She completely ignored Amara, dismissing her as just another beautiful woman on the arm of a powerful man. "I'm Veronica Sterling, the chairwoman. If there is anything you need, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." David's expression was glacial. He didn't extend a hand. He simply looked down at her, his eyes cold. "Veronica, isn't it?" he said, his voice flat. He then turned his head slightly, his gaze softening as he looked at Amara. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Darling," he said, his voice now warm and full of affection. "I believe you remember Veronica. She was married to your ex-husband, Michael." The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. Veronica's fawning smile froze, then shattered. Her eyes darted from David's adoring face to Amara's calm one. The name, the connection, the implication. Recognition dawned, followed by a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked at Amara, truly looked at her, and saw not the downtrodden woman from her past, but a goddess draped in gold, holding the arm of the most powerful man in the room. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. And Amara? She did nothing. She said nothing. She simply met Veronica's panicked gaze and gave her a small, serene smile. A smile that held no malice, no triumph, just peace. That quiet, dignified smile was more devastating than any shouted insult could ever be. It said, "You have no power over me anymore." Later in the evening, after the main course had been served, the host took the stage for the final fundraising push. He announced the surprise $10 million donation from the Kalu Adeyemi Foundation. After the gasps died down, he said, "And Mr. Kalu has asked that his fiancée, the brilliant chef Amara Adeyemi, say a few words about the new community kitchen project this donation will create." A spotlight found Amara. A microphone was placed in front of her. The entire room was silent, waiting. Her heart was beating a steady, calm rhythm. She looked out at the sea of faces, her eyes eventually finding Veronica, who was slumped in her chair, pale and trembling. Amara took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the grand ballroom. "My mother in Nigeria taught me a simple lesson," she said. She said, "The hand that gives is the hand that gathers." For a long time in my life, I had very little to give. A kind word, a spare hour, sometimes just a single meal. Her eyes flickered towards where David sat, a look of profound love passing between them. But I learned that even sharing that single meal can change a life. Not just the life of the person you feed, but your own. This kitchen, it is not for the homeless as a concept. It is for the person shivering on a park bench. It is for the single mother choosing between rent and dinner. It is for everyone who has ever been hungry. For everyone who has ever felt invisible. It is to remind them, and to remind all of us, that dignity is not measured in dollars, but in how we treat one another, especially when we think no one is watching and when we have absolutely nothing to gain. The room was spellbound. There was no artifice in her words, only truth. The host, wiping a tear from his eye, made the final announcement about the foundation and her engagement. The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. As Veronica succumbed to the darkness, Amara stood in the warm, bright light, a queen in her own right, her victory absolute, precisely because she had never sought it. The fallout from that night was swift and brutal. In the world that Veronica had so carefully cultivated, public image was everything. Her public collapse, coupled with the revelation of her connection to Amara and the story of her past cruelty, a story that spread like wildfire through the city's elite circles, rendered her a social pariah overnight. The invitations stopped coming. The calls went unanswered. Her friends, who had been attached to her status, scattered like rats from a sinking ship. Her husband, Michael, who had built his own precarious business on the back of Veronica's social connections, found his lines of credit drying up. Their marriage, a hollow structure built on ambition and materialism, could not withstand the pressure. It imploded, leaving behind a wreckage of debt and bitterness. Veronica lost the house, the car, the jewels. She lost everything she had valued. Amara, however, never gloated. She never spoke of Veronica at all. She was too busy building her empire of kindness. The community kitchen project launched within months, a state-of-the-art facility that provided hot, nutritious meals with a side of dignity. Amara herself was often there, not as a benefactor looking for a photo op, but in an apron, stirring a massive pot of soup, talking to the people who came for a meal. One cold Tuesday evening, about a year after the gala, Amara was serving her famous pepper soup at the kitchen. The line was long, full of faces weathered by hardship. A woman near the front of the line kept her head down, a thin scarf pulled over her hair. When she finally reached the front of the counter, she hesitantly lifted her head. It was Veronica. She was gaunt, her eyes hollow, her clothes cheap and worn. All the sharp, shiny surfaces had been stripped away, leaving behind a woman who looked broken and lost. Their eyes met. For a long moment, the world seemed to stop. Veronica flinched, bracing herself for the inevitable blow, for the smirk, the cutting remark, the triumphant, "I told you so." She deserved it. She knew she did. But Amara didn't smirk. Her expression softened with a compassion that was almost unbearable to witness. She looked at the woman who had tried to destroy her, and she saw only another hungry person on a cold day. She ladled a generous portion of the steaming, fragrant pepper soup into a container. She added a piece of fresh bread. Then she slid it across the counter to Veronica. "It is not much," Amara said, her voice gentle, her words an echo from a lifetime ago on a park bench. "But it is hot. Eat. It will make you feel better." Veronica stared at the soup, then at Amara's kind, unwavering gaze. This final act of grace was more devastating than any revenge could ever have been. It was a mirror held up to her own shriveled soul. All the cruelty, all the mockery, all the years of looking down on people, it all came crashing down on her in a wave of unbearable shame. A choked sob escaped her lips, then another. She stood there, in a line of homeless people, and wept, the hot container of soup warming her cold hands. It was the end of her old life, and perhaps the very first painful step toward a new one. Amara and David were married not in a grand cathedral, but in the lush backyard of their home, surrounded by a small group of family and friends. Amara's mother was flown in from Nigeria, her face a mask of radiant pride. Leo, in a tiny tuxedo, served as the ring bearer, carrying the velvet pillow with solemn importance. Jide, David's driver, stood as his best man, a genuine, non-sarcastic smile on his face for once. When it came time to exchange the rings, David took Amara's hand. The ring he slipped on her finger was a simple, elegant band of platinum with a single, flawless diamond. But it was the inscription on the inside that held the true value. As she looked at it later, the tiny, perfect letters brought tears to her eyes. It did not say forever or I love you. It said simply, my last meal. It was a promise, a reminder, a testament to the fact that their billion-dollar empire was built on the foundation of a single, shared container of soup. The story of Amara and David teaches us a profound and enduring truth, one that is often forgotten in a world that worships wealth and status. It teaches us that the greatest test of a person's character is not what they do when they have everything, but what they are willing to give when they have nothing. It is a reminder that a person's true net worth is not measured by the number in their bank account, but by the quiet, uncelebrated kindness they show when no one is watching. We are all, in some way, beggars. We are all hungry for something. Some hunger for food and shelter, their needs stark and immediate. But others hunger for connection, for recognition, for a sense that they matter in a world that can feel cold and indifferent. We hunger to be seen, not for our titles or our possessions, but for the quiet truth of who we are. The greatest wealth a person can possess is not the ability to satisfy their own hunger, but the capacity to recognize and answer that hunger in another human being. Amara, with her single container of pepper soup, was richer than any of the people in that glittering ballroom. Her wealth was not in her pocket. It was in her spirit. She understood what her mother had taught her, that the hand that gives is the hand that gathers. By giving away half of the little she had, she gathered a harvest of love, dignity, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. She did not set out to find a billionaire. She set out to feed a hungry man, and in doing so, she found everything. David, surrounded by his billions, was starving. He was starving for authenticity, for a connection that wasn't transactional. He had to become a beggar to find true riches. His journey reminds us that money can build walls that are just as effective as prison bars, isolating us from the very thing we need most: genuine human contact. His story is a testament to the fact that sometimes you have to lose everything to find the one thing that is worth keeping. Their love story is a modern parable. It challenges us to look past the surfaces, to question our own judgments. The man in rags might be a king. The woman in the worn-out coat might be a queen. We are constantly presented with our own park bench moments, opportunities to share our soup, whatever that may be, a moment of our time, a word of encouragement, the simple act of seeing the humanity in a person everyone else ignores. These are the moments that define us. They are the choices that determine the true trajectory of our lives. For in the end, when the noise of our lives fades and the balance sheets are forgotten, we will not be remembered for the fortunes we built or the status we achieved. We will be remembered for the hunger we were willing to share. We will be remembered for the warmth we offered on a cold day. We will be remembered by the simple, profound measure of our own open, giving heart. If this story moved your heart, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because every tale has a lesson, and Alfred's Folk Tales never forgets.